has Berkeley influenced you to become the person that you are today?
It was very foundational. I also had a unique experience in that I pursued my degree in 3 years instead of 4 to save money. And that kind of expediency meant that I had 21 unit, like the maximum course load every semester, which just made it to a degree a bit more intense. And, you know, while that was very helpful in terms of, yeah, getting out of college without debt, I don't actually recommend that if you can avoid it, because I think Berkeley, the people that I was with, the ideas I got exposed to, profoundly actually changed my trajectory. I came into UC Berkeley because I was steadfast on law school and child advocacy law within the family court system. And then I got exposed to a lot of environmentalists and was really active in agricultural groups and all kinds of different like community-based projects in the Berkeley area. And that just shifted my projection towards environmental policy dramatically. But at the same time, in terms of like the social experience, my time was so compact, so compressed. I was so focused and working so hard that when I graduated, I was like, I had already taken the LSAT, the exam to go into law school. But I chose to do a year off, and I instead spent a year going to live and work on regenerative farms and working for different environmental nonprofits. And so Berkeley was kind of the impetus for that experience because of how compressed it had been, also just totally opening up my worldview. But then that year ended up also just kind of changing what my aspirations were. And I think that that's why I'm now in the halls of Congress today, just kind of thinking about how we are connected to other people. Agriculture does a really good job of that because it's all based on systems.
And which teacher influenced you the most and why?
I had an associate professor, her name is Tiffany Page, and she definitely, and I've told her this, has changed the course of my life. I don't know if, I hope people have this kind of experience, but for me, it was really quite formidable in that her class was on sustainable development, quote unquote, but really it was a class on kind of like decolonizing your mind. As an American student, you're taught a lot of kind of an arc of history that like celebrates American nationalism and American exceptionalism. And then to have a professor who kind of flipped a lot of that on its head and exposed the military industrial complex, who talked a lot about structural adjustment programs, who gave me a much more kind of globally oriented perspective of how other countries might view the United States and our history and our involvement in other countries, really just started getting gears turning. And I had so many more questions when I left her class than when I began with. And that was also one of the reasons that I was then drawn to do some sort of experiential learning process, like by going to small scale farms, because we were talking a lot about, you know, what are the solutions to climate change? And a lot of them were locally based, in addition to like major policy shifts. And I just was like, I've never seen anything like that as a student from LA or going to UC Berkeley. And I can't even imagine what it would be like to think in those terms, because my life has always been in a big city. And yeah, that was a really, and so I credit her with a lot of just kind of shifting the perspectives that I've had in the past.
And if I may ask you, a lot of my students apply to California, a lot of my students apply to Berkeley. So they would definitely want to hear from you how you handled your personal essay, which I always call the clincher in the case of a competitive college.
Well, I was really fortunate in that I was involved in a free program called College Bound. And so I worked with a woman who was a volunteer, and we just went, I did that essay process for probably several months, just writing draft after draft after draft. But I would agree with you. And I would say, I think a thing for school like UC Berkeley, I mean, I'm in the UC system as a California native. it's, I don't even know how many applicants at this point, maybe 80,000 or something. And I think that the essay is actually
over
sorry.
100,000.
Wow.
Over 100,000.
Okay. Yeah, so it's an incredible pool of applicants, and a lot of people have high GPAs and SAT scores and all of these things. But I think that's your chance to differentiate and tell your narrative, and to really be kind of specific. That's what my college, the person who worked with me, the volunteer, kept trying to get out of me, is like, let's not speak in generalizations or aspirations, because those are beautiful qualities that you have, but those are quite universal. So I would like you to be, honest, and share why you, like, what makes you unique as an individual, as much as you're willing to be forthcoming about that. And I do think it matters. I really do, because it is the only place where you don't just become a bunch of numbers that they've already filtered out.
So you can pass this question if you want to, but in the end, what was unique about you and how did you make yourself stand out?
Well, I would say for myself, I kind of told the arc of what was my professional development experience. I had come from a family of a lot of domestic violence, and that was why I was interested in child advocacy. And that had always kind of been my draw towards law school. But my experiences throughout high school, leadership, I think, is another thing that's really important, is like, while you're a high school student, pursue activities or pursue what your passion is. If it's the arts, if it's sciences, if it's CS, don't wait for college to become that avenue. If you can, find ways to be involved. And so I discussed how I had always been a part of different policy decisions, or policy programs, I should say. And then talked about how that was kind of that the long arc of where I thought I was going, which it'll ultimately change. So that's another thing to be to expect going into university. But I was very clear on where I was headed, and I was very clear as to what experiences, very transparently, frankly, had got me there, but without making it. I think you have to be weary of like telling a kind of sob story. Like, there's a whole narrative now that like, oh, I have to have had some traumatic event to be worthy of going into college and these essays. And that's not at all the case. But I think what they're looking for, frankly, is vulnerability. So what life experiences have you had that shape who you are?
Yeah, as I tell my students, there's a difference between a college and an asylum. So